Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to my buddy Bruce Coffin about his latest book, Bitter Fall. Show us a copy of that book, Bruce.
Right there.
I love it. I love it. This is the Detective Justice series, your newest series. Is that right?
It is. This is the second book in that series, and it just came out January 13th.
Lovely. It's so wonderful. You have such a talent for writing police procedurals. It's a little early for me. You already know I'm running behind the scenes. Police procedurals. They're my two words I was looking for. And I know that you were a police officer before you started your full-time writing career. Tell me how long you were in the police force.
I was in the Portland Police Department for 28 years, and I retired at the rank of Detective Sargent, running really the violent crime detectives. So they did everything from missing persons up to homicides. And after 28 years was enough.
I can imagine the burnout must have been. I mean, you know, honestly, stressful jobs take their toll on us. But I tell you, it has certainly influenced your writing in a positive way, because I enjoyed your John Byron series, and now I'm here for Brock Justice. So give the audience an overview of what Bitter Fall is about.
So really, it's the second book in the series, and for those that have followed along, you know that Brock is a Maine State Police homicide detective, and Brock is a detective that in the first book something happens and he gets sent to northern Maine as a result of really having to testify against a fellow trooper, and in what's considered a questionable shooting, and so he really ends up being persona non grata. They send him to the Bangor barracks, which is Troop E for the state police. And the Bangor barracks is where the Major Crimes Unit North runs out of. So he skips right over the Major Crimes Unit Central and goes to North. That's where they stick him. And so in the first book, he ends up getting paired up with a fledgling detective named Chloe Wright. And I really enjoy writing their relationship, because it started like most good relationships. It starts a little rocky, and you have to build on that. And so she's really the polar opposite of him by experience, and the way she sees life and where she's from and the whole thing. And she loves the outdoors, and she's very capable. And Brock hates the outdoors, and and all it does is remind him of his dad, who was a trooper, who loved the outdoors. And so in this second one, they have now worked a case successfully together. They're really beginning to feel like, I think the two of them, that it's a partnership, which Brock was very hesitant to even admit. He wanted to think of her as the trainee that he got saddled with. And so in this particular book, they get a late night call to go to Greenville, Maine, on a deserted back road next to Moosehead Lake, where a woman appears to have been run down in a motor vehicle accident. She was a pedestrian. And that's all they know. And they get there, and they're like, why are we called to this? We work homicides. Why would we care about a fatal accident? Somebody else could handle that. And it turns out that there's more than meets the eye to this accident. And so, and then Brock and Chloe are off and running.
So the book starts out from the perspective of the woman that gets murdered.
Yes.
And it's, I will say that, I love it when an author takes I'm going to say those chances. You're a seasoned professional, so I don't think it's a chance with you, Bruce. But I mean, I think when you start off with something that thrilling to begin with, it definitely propels the reader to want to read more and more and more. Right. And I agree that I did not know, I learned something. I did not know that because it appeared she was in a fatal vehicle accident, they wouldn't have been called in. I would have thought maybe they would have been called in, but because it was something different than that. But I love the fact that in that first chapter, we see from the victim's standpoint how very frightened she is. And you did such a great job with that.
Thank you. It's really, because as a thriller slash mystery writer, I love anything that propels me into a story. Or really, the thing I like to use as a good example is my goal is to grab the reader by the throat and pull them into the story, kicking and screaming. If I can hook you bad by the first couple pages, I won't let go, and you won't either. And
I agree.
And I thought this story, it's because the victim in this story really was such a, it was one of those where I was sort of conjuring up cases where we worked, and every once in a while you get a victim who could be portrayed as Mother Teresa. And a lot of victims that we got from homicide were not that. They couldn't be further from that. And so for those, I think those cases really were the ones that were emotional for us to work, because you could see, your own sister or your own mom, or, the girl down the street that babysits your animals or your kids. You could see them in that role. And so I thought, not only did I want to pull the reader into the story and really make it a compelling read, but I wanted to give you a taste of who she was from her perspective, because it's the only chance you get to see in this book who she was, other than, other characters' opinions of her. And
Right.
I thought that was a real true look. And the only time I could do it would be at the beginning. So I had done that previously on a book that was the second Detective Byron novel, Beneath the Depths. And in that book, I realized I was explaining this to somebody the other day, it occurred to me that I had kind of done a similar thing, but for a different reason. In that book, I had written it where the book opens with the body being found. And as I was reading it, I'm like, there's something missing. I don't know what it is, but something's missing. And in that story, I wanted to tell you what it was like for detectives to investigate a death where the person wasn't a good person. And the fact that we don't get to choose our victims, we have to investigate just as hard if they're bad people that no one likes as we do if they're good people. And so that I realized that was missing from that book. And so I had to write a scene from the perspective of the victim. And that victim was not a good person, but you still needed to see who he was so that it would land later on. So I learned that, I think, way back when.
And I think it stood you well, because for me, I was there with her running. I'm not the fastest runner, but I have run, and I know what happens when you get a pain or there's something wrong, you get a hitch or whatever, and you're trying to push through it because you're trying to finish your race. You're trying to hopefully it won't mar your time. But I felt like, and then you gave us an athletic person too, which I really enjoyed, because, it could be somebody like me who's older and chunkier.
Right.
We fall down a lot easier than someone athletic. But I thought that, you gave her enough hurdles and obstacles to overcome that it made it very interesting to me. I would not like to be in Summer's place, just so we're clear, but I may bitch about this life, but I sort of like it.
Right. Well, and you want to think, geez, maybe I should be in better shape. If that ever happens to me, how do I get away? Right?
Well, I have read that fat people are harder to kidnap because you take up more space than a thin person. So, but if I was in a foot chase, I would definitely not win. Of that, I'm sure.
Geez, back in the day when I had to do that, we were carrying 25 pounds of equipment. So you were starting every foot chase on the wrong foot, literally.
Yeah. I think that, I love watching police shows and detective shows on television, and they make it look so easy. And I know from the officers that I know in person, you are weighted down, and you've really got to be at the top of your game in a foot chase, because the perp, typically, unless they're carrying a television, doesn't have 25 pounds on them.
No, and they're motivated. They're afraid of getting caught. Right. You think about it, as when I first started, it was like the biggest thing in the world to lose, somebody, whether I was chasing them on foot or chasing them in a car. You second guess yourself forever, right? You get all bummed out, and then as time goes on, like anything, you start to realize, the hell with that. I'm just getting a paycheck. This guy's trying to get away. He's got everything to lose, and I'm like, I could pull something. I could fall down and smash my face. You start realizing maybe you send the younger officer after them, and
I totally agree.
you chase them around the corner and wait for them in the car. You know,
That's it. I do that at work. I'm like, oh, you go do that. It's okay.
There you go.
My back isn't as good as it used to be. So,
It's true.
So you gave us a fairly large cast of characters, but which when I'm reading a book, I'm always sometimes worried about the cast of characters' size because, when I interview you, I need to know who these people are and not get them mixed up. Right. But I will say that I felt like every time you introduced a new character, it was very comfortable. You don't force the characters on us. You ease them into the situation, and they're there for a reason. Yep. And I did, in one writing class I took, somebody said, if the character is there for a reason, you have to name them. But they have to have a reason to be there if you name them. And so I'm like, oh, okay, I like that. And so it was great. I liked Zimmerman a lot. I thought he brought a little bit of nice levity to Brock and Chloe, which I assume is why he was there.
Right. Yeah. That's really, it's really, I tell people, he's really, Zimmerman, of course, is a lot of fun to write. I've had a Zimmerman type character a couple of different times now in my series. And to me, he's that Lenny from the original Law and Order. Lenny always got the best inappropriate line just before the half hour when everything went to court. And it's a real thing. It's the gallows humor. It's the pressure relief valve for police detectives. I mean, you're dealing with death every single day. And not only the death, you deal with things that are puzzles that are really hard to solve and to get what you need to be able to prosecute the killer. But you're also dealing with the survivors and the family members and friends of those victims. The emotion level, whether you're connected to the victim or not as a detective, doesn't matter. I mean, the stakes couldn't get any higher. And a lot of times we end up at each other's throats because you get really passionate about working this case. It's no different than being, closed in with your family for a week. All of a sudden you realize there's a lot of things that bug you, right? And detectives are the same way. You start to get passionate about what you think happened or your theory or whatever. And so it was always good to have a Zimmerman type character. And in my career, we were lucky that there was always somebody that would step up and be that person. And you could see it rise to that level. Both I saw it as a detective and then also as a detective sergeant. But you would see detectives get to that breaking point. And it's really hard to be effective as an investigator when you get to that because it's emotional now. And to have that Zimmerman person step up and say exactly the right thing, even though it's usually inappropriate, but say exactly the right thing at the right moment, you can just watch everybody deflate. The smiles come, maybe there's a laugh, and you're like, okay, yeah, we're not handling this right. Correct the course, and onward we go. And that's really what it comes down to. So those are always fun to write because I think he speaks for a lot of people that have tried to find that thing that makes you laugh at a scene that's not funny at all.
Right.
And it's self-preservation. It really is. That's why police officers have gallows humor.
I think so. And I also think that you gave him a very loving nature too. So there's a scene where Ronnie Libby's mother has a meltdown, and she has a meltdown for a good reason. And he goes and he comforts her. And that was so beautifully written. And I would assume, and I'm going to ask you from your professional job as a police officer, how hard is that to do with a victim's parents or a victim? I mean, because, in this day and age, I'm going to make it even a little harder for you, Bruce. In this day and age, some people don't like to be touched. Right. I am a toucher, a hugger, a kisser. That's my nature. Yep. And it is my desire to bring that to someone else. But I can imagine if you're in law enforcement, that must be difficult because you have that fine line. So what about Zimmerman? Did you feel that you could give him that quality?
Well, one of the things that I wanted to build into him was he has the luxury of having been there. He has the experience. He's the older guy in this equation. Even though Brock is very experienced as a homicide detective, Brock doesn't have the years in that Zimmerman does. And Zimmerman, in the first book, we find out that Zimmerman was actually Chloe Wright's training officer when she was still a trooper.
Oh,
And
okay.
so they have a history, and she looks up to him. And so every once in a while, you get a chance to actually show, and here he is kind of the third wheel in this investigation, but to show the reader what he's capable of. And I like that because Brock is a different kind of character. Chloe could have filled that void as far as, she would be able to provide the female and the feminine touch to the woman who is suffering at that point. But I think the reader would have expected that, and we don't know what Chloe could do or not do. And we know Brock has issues with his family. He wasn't close with his dad. It's only he and his dad at this point, and so he's not a warm and fuzzy guy where he could do that, but you'd know it was fake. It wouldn't come across as genuine, I don't think. You'd really have to push him into an emotional corner for that to happen. But Zimmerman, I felt like, was the natural fix to that, and he was the perfect person to have at that thing because it's legit. He's doing what's real, even though he always says the wrong thing. In that kind of situation, he'll step up and be what you need him to be. So when I build these characters, it's really, I look at all the qualities I want them to have, and in my mind, they have those qualities before you ever see them as a reader. And I pick and choose when I'm going to introduce those and which book and why. And there's a lot of thought because I write in close third person, which allows me the luxury of being in different characters' heads, sort of in different characters' heads. It allows me to figure out which character I can use to tell a scene in most effectively. And sometimes it might not be the main characters. In that case, I think Zimmerman was the guy for the job.
I agree. And I think as a former police officer, I think you do the law enforcement a good turn by giving empathy to Zimmerman, because I know that in today's world, sometimes the police don't always get the best rap. We
Right.
see a bad apple. And in today's world, social media likes to echo whatever's wrong at such a great level. And we don't really want to echo what's right at that same type of level. So I really felt like you imbued Zimmerman with so many characters. I want to go have a cocktail or a cup of coffee with him.
Right. Well, that's good. It makes me happy that you say that about my third guy. It's funny. We talk about all the things that happen, and I don't want to get too far down into the weeds, but I think you're right in that. And it's funny. Social media to me is just an extension of what has always happened.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember the famous Rockwell painting. It's that whole thing where in every painting there's two couples. It might be two women, two men, a man and a woman, and it goes around, and it's basically they're gossiping about something, and you can see the reactions on the faces, and it just goes around, like the story just keeps going from person to person. And that was what the phones were all about. Like, nobody would call anybody to say, oh my God, so-and-so did such a great job with the thing. But if you heard your neighbor was, oh, there's some bad stuff about my neighbor, then the first thing you did was pick up the phone and tell somebody else, right?
That's right.
And the story got bigger and bigger, and the whole thing. And I feel like social media is that. We do that. I think we do that as a society. We tend to look for the bad. You don't see nightly news stories about somebody doing a kick butt job. Somebody was awesome and they never wanted thanks, or usually we hear about that after they're dead. We never cover that when they're alive.
No, we read about it in the obituary.
Right.
I agree with you.
And then everyone's painted as Mother Teresa right in their obituary.
Yes. So that's a big thing. I think in some ways I might have been good on the police force, in some ways bad. But so when it comes to death and dying, I always say if the person was an SOB when they were alive, they're an SOB when they're dead. Don't paint them to be a Mother Teresa or a saint now.
Right.
He beat the stuffings out of his wife and children. Why? Right. How is he a saint now that he's dead?
Right. No, and as a police officer, I alluded to having a bad victim. As a police officer, the one thing you have to keep in mind, and it's funny because I was dealing with this before I ever heard I think it's Michael Conley's Harry Bosch that made the everyone counts or nobody counts was the sort of the line that they use for that book series, and it's true. And that was the point in writing like that second Byron book was you can always look at the victim and say, oh, this person's not deserving of my best or whatever. But the reality is, if you're going to be an effective detective, an effective homicide detective specifically, you have to remember that that person, no matter how how horrible they might have been, despicable they might be as a person, was at one point somebody's kid, and maybe they're somebody's father. You know, we can all focus on the bad, and maybe as a detective, you've experienced that person's worst, but you forget that there are people out there that still cared about them, even if they were conflicted about that care, and so that is who you're doing the work for. If you can motivate yourself to solve the case because the victim was great, that's easy. But when they're not great, then you have to find something else to cling to, and sometimes it's the survivors and what it means to them to lose that. You know, I mean, we've all seen the kid come from a great home, or what appears to be a great home, and nurturing parents and loving family and the whole thing, and then the kid, for whatever reason, ends up becoming an adult that's just like, oh my God, like Satan on wheels.
Right.
And you wonder, where did that come from? And you think it's still going to be horrible for the family when they're gone.
Yes.
Because you think to yourself, they'll wonder what they did wrong. Were they a reason for this happening? So the detectives really have to cling to whatever they can so that they can work the case and give it their best, really.
Well, so as a reader, you gave me that in Brock's voice early on in this book. He says, oh, he's trying to keep his mind clear, and he's like not coming up with too many solutions when he doesn't have all the facts. And I think that, that's a human, I think humans want to get to the end, whatever that end is. We want a resolution. We want to fix it. We want to move past it, whatever it is. We want it to be over and done, and we want all the answers. But it takes a while to get answers. So that leads me to something else you did in this book, and I don't know, you might have done it in the first one. Did you give us a countdown in the first one, so to speak?
Oh, as far as the time and date, everything was happening.
Yeah.
I don't remember if I did that in the first one, and it's funny. I was just thinking about that the other day. Well, actually today, because I'm working on the third novel in the series right now, and for whatever reason, I don't do it in every book, and I think it's relative to what I think matters. And if it's something that matters, like that might build tension for you if you realize, holy God, this is what time it is. It's been an hour since the last thing. But for some reason, sometimes I don't think that matters as much. I don't know. Having said that, now I'll go back and probably add it in. Who knows? But,
now you'll obsess about Dan's passion.
Right,
I said the phrase countdown earlier, and it's really not a countdown. It's much more of a diary entry, I would say, because and as the reader, I got to follow along and to realize that, in 2 days' time, they haven't had any sleep, and there are times where you don't eat, and which, speaking of eating, is a cinnamon bun your favorite?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? After writing,
you would. I mean, the cinnamon bun is built up in this book.
It's funny. I met the woman briefly that owns the Greenville Grinds in real life. She's not even named the same in the book, but the business is legit. And when I was doing the work on this, you do all the research you can. I've learned now that the trip after I've written the story to kind of nail down details is the one that's important. Going necessarily before I write the story doesn't work, because I might change things and whatever. So the story matters, and then wherever I can make things more accurate, I will do that. So it usually is a trip after the story's written. And Karen and I went up, my wife and I went up, and we spent a couple days in Greenville. And of course, it was early in the season, not in the fall when I wrote it. So a lot of things aren't even open yet. But I got a chance to go around and look at everything. And my last day, because I'm a coffee, I'm an addict to caffeine. My last day, I said, I got to stop in at this place. And I had intentionally had picked the Greenville Grinds from my research, because I thought that's exactly the kind of place the detectives would hang out. Like, because she's open early working, the chief can get them in. They don't want to be in a foofy place when they're having their coffee in the morning talking about the case. They just want to be someplace to get their fix and get the day started. So I knew that would be where we would hang out if it was me working a real case. So we went up, and that was my last stop that morning, and we were going to head out of town. And wouldn't you know, I go up, and she happened to be closed for that day for whatever reason. Her help didn't come in or whatever. So I'm like, man, are you kidding me? So, because I wanted to, have whatever she had to eat and have a coffee and
right.
And so, but she was in there working, so she answered the door, and I quickly let her know who I was. I wasn't a serial killer. Here's my business card, and this is why I'm here. And I said, just so you know, I said, your business features prominently in the book that I've written about Greenville. And she was all excited about it. Well, we got home, and then I realized that she was following my author page on Facebook, and
Nice.
that she was kind of paying attention to everything. So at one point I reached out and I said, hey, would you, I don't know if you're a Kindle reader, but I can offer you an early ARC if you're interested in reading it. And she goes, oh my God, thank you so much. I've been waiting to see when it would come out and the whole thing. And I said, well, I'll send you the early read. And I said, but don't thank me too soon, because I said, you may have to change your menu by the time you get done reading what I did to it. So I said, I really built up those cinnamon buns. I mean, they're plate size, the biggest in the state, dripping with icing and, the whole deal. So, and it's funny because that, I don't know why, but it became a thing for me. I could smell it as I was writing these scenes. I'm like, damn, I want one of those, right?
I wanted one too, Bruce.
Right. And it came up in some of the reviews. Like, I don't know if it was the Library Journal one or who it was, but the cinnamon bun thing came up in some of the reviews, and I laughed. I thought that was really funny.
Well, it's funny because I think that when we write a location, especially if there's food involved, I think you sort of have to zero in on one thing, because you could go to Cheesecake Factory and there's a million things on the menu,
Right.
but they're not known except for cheesecake.
Right.
If you go into Cheesecake Factory and obsess about the cheesecake, it works. But if you want to talk about the chicken piccata, really?
Right.
That's not what I eat when I go there.
So. Right. That wouldn't necessarily work for sure.
No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't.
But it's fun, and it's fun doing putting the real businesses in wherever I can. Because you realize when you're doing this, you're shining a light on these small towns, and you're giving them a chance to shine a little bit for people. They'd be curious about visiting them in real life, and so when I can use a real business and give it a positive, look, to me that's important. It's a way to make tourists want to come and check out what I've done, and make sure that it really isn't a crazy place to have people dropping dead everywhere. So,
well, I did enjoy it. I have been to Portland, which because I had lunch with you and Karen.
That's right. That's
but
right.
I do want to get to northern Maine now, because I like the setting, and I can imagine in the autumn it is gorgeous.
Oh.
So
it's unbelievable.
Yes.
That was another thing you had mentioned earlier, I think off camera when we were talking about the setting and how I bring that to life and make it like really part of the story. And I think I really think the reason I got that is from reading a lot of James Lee Burke, the Robichaux series in particular. To me, that's a love story it's a love letter to Louisiana and specifically the New Orleans area. Mm-hmm. And he does that so well. I've always been enamored by his ability to take, I said there's two people that do that well that I have read. I'm sure there's more, but he and Reed Farrell Coleman are both excellent at that. Yes. And I think they both have the poet's heart. And so it's real easy, even when you're writing a really gritty, nasty, violent noir type of story, to still be able to figure out a way to layer on some brushstrokes where the color pops, or the chestnuts hitting the roof of the car, or the smell of Lake Pontchartrain and the ozone stacking up for the next thunderstorm. To me, those are things that pull you right into the story. And I've always admired that. And hopefully some of that, bleeds through in my work.
It does indeed. I promise to buy you a cinnamon bun next time I see you.
That's a deal. That is a deal.
Oh, good. I do look forward to seeing you soon, and Karen as well. Again, The book is called Bitter Fall, and it's by Bruce Robert Coffin. It is highly recommended. It is so wonderful. Thank you, Bruce, for being here.
Thank you, Dan. It's been a pleasure.
Perfect. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.